Hi, I'm Zane Moss from Fish and Game, based in Invercargill in the Southland region. Duck hunting's pretty big down here, as many of you will know, and because of that, Fish and Game staff have a lot to do with duck hunters, and they're all keen duck hunters themselves. Because of that involvement with duck hunters, it's become apparent that there's a need for something to help people get into duck hunting and help them with a few tips and things that will aid their success. Duck hunting's not really like golf or fly fishing for that matter, where there's any number of videos out there to help people. So we've produced this video with the hopes that it will help people get into duck hunting and help some existing hunters as well, perhaps pick up one or two tips that they mightn't have considered or placed much emphasis on. We've tried to shoot it in the field primarily in sort of hunting scenarios, hopefully to make it interesting for people and easier to interpret the points that are involved in the video. So I hope you enjoy it and hope you pick up a tip or two, and I hope it brings you a bit more success in this coming season.
Right, so in this part of the video we're going to talk about shotgun patterning. Now the pattern is the area of pellets and the shape of the area of pellets that your shotgun fires at different ranges. I'm sure you all know that a shotgun fires a number of pellets rather than an individual projectile that a rifle fires. So the key thing for harvesting ducks is hitting them with enough pellets that are large enough and therefore carrying enough energy to harvest it humanely. Now patterning really is a trade-off with waterfowl hunting, and that to maintain that pellet density, if you're shooting at further ranges, say you're pass shooting or you're shooting in a situation where you're really going to struggle to get your birds within 30, 35, 40 yards, and you're consistently shooting it beyond 45 yards, you're going to have to use a relatively tight choke, probably bigger pellet sizes to try and maintain that pellet energy. But the problem with that is once you come to a closer range, say you get a bird that decoys really well, comes through at 20 yards, your pattern will be very tight, a lot smaller, and it's therefore very difficult to hit those birds. Now from my perspective, if you're an average shotgun shot or worse like me, it's those close birds that you can hit. So I think in a lot of situations you've got to be careful you don't overly choke your pattern, if you like, so it's too tight and you miss a lot of close birds that should be the easy ones because your pattern's too tight. So we'll start off shooting at 30 yards on this fairly rudimentary patterning board we've got here. It can be fairly simple, obviously. Graham Hughes kindly cut out some duck shapes, so I've got something to aim at. Hopefully we hit it with some pellets. We'll start at 30 yards with an open choke and we'll see how many pellet strikes we get on this board. Right, well the best way to establish range these days is to use a rangefinder. We're at 30 yards. Obviously, for whatever reason, people tend to measure in yards still, yards and pounds. So we'll start at 30 yards, which is a fairly common distance for waterfowl hunting. When I asked the cameraman this morning how far this was, he guessed at 50 and he's a duck hunter. So I think that demonstrates the benefit of using a rangefinder. Right, well I've actually hit the target and the duck, much to my cameraman's surprise. So the pattern appears to be centred on the duck. So we've just drawn a 30-inch circle, which is basically about 375 millimetres radius. Put a pin in the centre, about where you think the centre of the pattern is. Draw a circle around it. Most of you won't have bothered cutting out duck silhouettes, which is fair enough. So you know you need 85 or 90 odd pellets in this circle to consistently hit a duck with 3 or 4 pellets, and we've got 99 pellets in this circle as it happens. So logic says that we should have hit the duck with more than enough pellets, and we have. There's actually quite a few hits on that duck. Right, now Graham got quite clever and used his artistic side, put a pink label on the back for basically the vital areas of the duck, and this one was certainly hit with more than enough pellets to have killed it humanely. Right, once again I've managed to hit the duck and the patterning board. The pattern seems to be centred on the duck, close enough really. Now pellet counts dropped from nearly 100 pellets down to 74, and it's quite a lot sparser. We used the cylinder choke, the most open choke, and that was from 45 yards. So really you can see there's some significant sort of holes in the pattern. There's not enough pellets to consistently hit a duck, and our duck did get hit with 4 pellets, and in this case he might have been unlucky in that, you know, one might have broken a wing and that one would have been in a vital organ of some description. But generally the pattern isn't consistent enough to shoot ducks consistently at that range. So with that, that choke and load combination, you wouldn't really be happy consistently using it. So that was at 45 yards. We'll now change to a tighter choke. We'll use modified choke at 45 yards and see how that influences the pattern characteristics. Right, well this is dramatically different from our last pattern. We've gone from using a cylinder choke to a modified choke. A cylinder choke is the most open choke, and modified is what people also call half choke, which is as tight as some people recommend you go with steel. And you can see why when you look at this pattern. This is at 45 yards, which is actually a long way to be shooting at waterfowl, I believe. When you use a rangefinder and actually work out how far 45 yards is, it looks like a pretty small target when you're looking at it. So we've gone from a cylinder choke, the most open choke, where we got 74 pellets within the circle. This time we've got over twice that, 155, which is by far the majority of the pellets within the shell. So that's a very tight pattern. Right, so we've established that that load will certainly work at 45 yards. It's quite a tight pattern. If we were consistently shooting birds at that range, that might well be a good load and choke combination for us to use. It's certainly tight enough. These pellets are US 4s or New Zealand or English classification 3s. That's another trick. Unfortunately, there's different classifications for pellet sizes depending on whether you're getting European or American ammunition, but your retailer will know and will be able to tell you. You need to use at least that sort of sized pellet to ensure you've got enough energy in that pellet to adequately penetrate the bird. So this load's certainly going to be adequate at this range. So now we'll bring this same load and pretend we've got a closer duck coming into our decoys, might decoy well. So instead of a passing shot, say at 45 yards, we'll have a go at a duck that's decoying nicely at 30 yards, and we'll see how that pattern changes. Right, well this is the closer pattern we shot with a modified choke. So we went from 45 yards using a load and choke combination set up as if we were shooting at ducks further away that we couldn't decoy, pass shooting or whatever, difficult conditions. So I've moved into it to 30 yards, which still isn't that close for especially for the likes of pond shooting. A lot of your shots will actually even be within 30 yards. So I've used a modified choke, 1.25 ounces of pellets, and this is the result. At 45 yards we had 155 pellets within this circle, and at 30 yards we've got 215, so by far the majority of the pellet count, very few of them outside of that 30-inch circle. And you can, if you look at it, it's very dense, you know, they're very tight. Even around the outside of the pattern there's very few pellets. So you could obtain, 90% of the pellets within probably half that pattern area again. It's very centre dense. Most of the pellets are almost within the radius of the duck if you look at it. So that means that unless you bang on the money at that close range, you're going to miss birds because, you know, unless it's perfectly centred, you're not going to hit it with enough pellets. You can see there's very few around the outside. So we certainly hit the duck with enough pellets, but it's fairly easy when it's not flying anywhere and it's stuck to a board. So yeah, you really would struggle, or I would struggle, with a tight choke like that close. And you'll shoot ducks a lot closer than 30 yards as well. You know, 30 yards is probably, even outside the average range that a lot of guys will shoot at in pond situations. So that one of those first patterns that we shot with a cylinder choke